Why the most valued people follow Stoic wisdom. There are some people whose names echo across centuries: Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. These men lived long ago, yet their words are still quoted, their principles are still studied, and their lives are still honored. Meanwhile, most of their contemporaries, men with great wealth, political influence, or fleeting popularity, are forgotten, swallowed by time. Have you ever wondered why? Why do certain people become truly valued, remembered as anchors of wisdom, while others vanish into obscurity? It is not the abundance of gold or the glory of their titles. Countless emperors lived and died, their names barely surviving in dusty archives. But Marcus Aurelius, who ruled in war and plague, is remembered not for his crown, but for his thoughts, for the wisdom he left behind. Epictetus, once a slave, had no wealth, no status, no inheritance, and yet today more people quote him than the rulers of his age. Seneca, advisor to emperors, lives on not through political power, but through the letters he wrote to guide the soul. True value has nothing to do with what the crowd chases. It is not a product of fame or fortune. It is born from character, from the depth of the inner life, from the strength to endure, to serve, and to live by principles. People instinctively sense it. When they meet someone who stands like a rock in the storm, who does not bend to anger, greed, or fear, they know they are in the presence of something rare. And that rarity, that unshakable center, is what makes a person truly valued. Today, in a world driven by appearances, the question remains the same. What will make you valued? Not liked for a season, not noticed for a moment, but valued, respected, trusted, remembered. The answer is no different now than it was in ancient Rome. It is found in wisdom, it is found in Stoic philosophy. Those who live by its teachings do not merely gain attention, they earn a place in the hearts and minds of others, not by asking for it, but by living in a way that demands it. And so, if you want to become one of those people, if you want your presence to inspire trust, your words to carry weight, and your life to mean something beyond yourself, you must look beyond what the world calls valuable. You must learn the secret that the Stoics lived by. That true value comes not from what you possess, but from who you are. Look around at the world today, and you will see a strange theater. People scrambling for recognition, obsessed with followers, with wealth, with outward success. Every headline celebrates the rise and fall of celebrities, billionaires, influencers. But notice how quickly the applause fades. The crowd that cheers one day turns away the next. Fame slips through the fingers like water. Riches lose their shine. Influence evaporates when it is not grounded in character. We live in an age of illusion, where people confuse attention with respect and noise with worth. But attention is cheap, respect is earned, and worth cannot be faked. The Stoics saw this clearly even 2,000 years ago. Seneca warned that the pursuit of wealth and luxury was a trap, a gilded cage that enslaves rather than liberates. Epictetus reminded his students that true freedom lies not in possessions, but in mastering desires. Marcus Aurelius looked upon his throne and recognized it as fragile, temporary, nothing compared to the enduring strength of virtue. Modern society tells you that your value is in your appearance, your achievements, the numbers in your account, the numbers on your screen. But none of this is secure. Fortune changes, markets collapse, beauty fades, status is stripped away. When all that is gone, what remains? For most people, nothing, and that is why they are forgotten. But the Stoic sees differently. To them, the only real wealth is character. The only real achievement is mastery of the self. The only real success is living in harmony with nature and reason. In a noisy, chaotic world, this clarity is rare, and rarity is what makes someone stand out. People may not always understand why, but they instinctively feel drawn to those who live by deeper principles. Think about it. When crisis strikes, do people turn to the loudest voice or the calmest one? When betrayal cuts deep, do they run to the boastful or the trustworthy? When confusion spreads, do they seek the clever or the wise? Always it is wisdom, steadiness, and character that people truly value. Everything else is decoration. So here is the challenge. Will you keep chasing the illusions of value that disappear with time, or will you build the kind of value that endures? The world will try to sell you vanity, applause, and wealth as the highest goods. But history tells another story. Those who are remembered, those who are valued across centuries, are those who followed wisdom over desire, virtue over vanity, stoic strength over fleeting comfort. That is the foundation. That is where true value begins. What does it mean to be truly valuable? The world will give you one answer: possessions, accomplishments, influence. But the Stoics gave another, one that is both simpler and more enduring. They believed that the worth of a human being rests not in what they have, but in what they embody. To them, true value is inseparable from virtue. Virtue, in the Stoic sense, is not a lofty abstraction, but the living practice of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. These are not decorations for the soul. They are the very foundation of it. Wisdom is the ability to see things as they are, free from illusion. Justice is fairness and integrity in our dealings with others. Courage is the strength to face pain, loss, or fear without surrendering your principles. Temperance is mastery over desire, the art of restraint in a world of excess. When a person lives according to these virtues, their presence becomes a force. They may not seek recognition, but people feel it. They may not strive to be noticed, yet their example shines more brightly than the most extravagant displays of wealth or vanity. Marcus Aurelius, though an emperor, defined himself not by his title, but by his character. He reminded himself daily that his role was to serve the common good, to be just even when tempted by anger, to be calm even when surrounded by chaos. Epictetus, born into slavery, carried no wealth and held no position, yet students flocked to him because they sensed a man unshaken by the world, a man who had discovered freedom within himself. The Stoic definition of value is both demanding and liberating. Demanding because it requires the constant effort of self-examination and discipline. Liberating because it places your worth entirely in your hands, safe from the judgments of others or the whims of fortune. You do not need to be born into privilege to be valuable. You do not need to be praised by the masses. You need only to live in accordance with virtue. That is the standard the Stoics lived by, and it is the only standard that time respects. This is why the people who embody Stoic principles are valued across all ages and cultures. Their lives carry a weight that is immune to decay. They are not admired for what they possessed, but for what they gave. An example of how to live with strength, clarity, and integrity. And that is why, centuries later, their names are still spoken, their wisdom still applied. True value is not temporary. True value is the legacy of a virtuous life. Trust is the currency of human connection, and those who follow Stoic wisdom are wealthy in it. In every age, people instinctively seek out those who are steady, reliable, and just. When storms of uncertainty sweep through society, the crowd does not look to the boastful or the cunning for guidance. It looks to the calm, to the fair, to the wise. And these are precisely the qualities Stoicism cultivates. A Stoic is trusted because they do not cling to outcomes beyond their control. They are not easily swayed by anger, greed, or ambition. This makes them predictable in the best sense. you know where they stand. Their word carries weight because it is consistent with their actions. Their judgment is respected because it is not clouded by panic or passion. In times of chaos, such people become natural leaders, even if they hold no official position. Consider Marcus Aurelius again. During his reign, the empire faced plague, war, and political turmoil. Yet, in his private writings, we see a man reminding himself not to give in to despair, not to be corrupted by power, not to abandon reason or justice. His citizens may not have known his thoughts, but they felt the stability of his rule. They saw an emperor who did not collapse under pressure. Trust is born in such moments, not from speeches, but from conduct. Even in smaller scales, this truth is evident. In families, communities, and workplaces, the ones who are valued most are those who can be counted on when things fall apart. The Stoic does not need to pretend. Their calm is genuine because it is rooted in principles rather than appearances. Their fairness is consistent because it comes from a sense of justice rather than fear of judgment. Their strength is admired because it is not loud or showy, but quiet and enduring. Epictetus once said that if you wish to be good, assume you are already being watched. Live as if your character is always under examination, because in truth it is. People are constantly testing whether they can trust you, whether you will hold steady when others lose themselves. And the Stoic, by mastering themselves, passes this test. This is why, in every era, Stoic people are sought after as advisors, leaders, and friends. Their value does not come from seeking approval, but from embodying the qualities that make trust possible. Reliability, composure, justice. These are treasures that no fortune can buy and no power can enforce. They can only be earned through the discipline of the soul. And once earned, they make a person not only respected, but truly valued. The Stoics taught a principle so simple and yet so profound that it can transform the way you live. Focus only on what you can control and let go of everything else. At first, this sounds obvious, but pause for a moment and reflect on how much of your energy is spent on things beyond your power, other people's opinions, the shifting winds of fortune, the outcomes of events you cannot dictate. Anxiety, frustration, and despair are born from this mistake, the attempt to control what cannot be controlled. A person who masters this distinction becomes rare and therefore valued. Imagine two people in the same situation. A storm delays their journey. One rages against the weather, curses the sky, and wastes hours in anger. The other accepts what cannot be changed and calmly focuses on what they can do in the meantime, reading, reflecting, preparing for the next step. Which person would you rather be around? Which would you trust in times of crisis? Control, as the Stoics saw it, lies only in your judgments, your choices, your actions. Everything else, fame, fortune, health, even life itself, is not fully yours. When you live by this truth, you stop being tossed around by circumstances. You become steady, unshaken, and composed. And people notice. They see someone who does not crumble under pressure, who does not lash out when wronged, who does not panic when plans fall apart. They see dignity, not because the world is easy, but because the soul is firm. Epictetus, once beaten and enslaved, still declared that no man could truly harm him because no one could touch his will. That is control. Marcus Aurelius, burdened with war and plague, reminded himself each morning that others would act unjustly, but his own response remained his choice. That is control. Seneca, surrounded by the luxuries of Rome, practiced simplicity and restraint to prove that he was not mastered by desire, that is, control. When people encounter such self-mastery, they recognize its power. They value it because it is so uncommon and because it provides an anchor in a world full of storms. To control yourself is to own the only thing that can never be taken from you. And those who own themselves completely are always valued above those enslaved by what they cannot command. There is something magnetic about calm in the middle of chaos. In a crowded room filled with panic, the one person who remains composed instantly becomes the center of attention. People turn to them not because they shout the loudest, but because they radiate steadiness. That is the power of Stoic composure. It inspires respect and trust without demanding it. The Stoics understood that life is filled with storms, illness, loss, betrayal, disaster. Most people are tossed about like leaves in the wind, consumed by fear or anger when hardship strikes. But the Stoic stands differently. They know they cannot stop the storm, but they can control how they meet it. Their calm does not come from denial, but from clarity. They accept reality as it is, and this acceptance makes them unshakable. Consider Marcus Aurelius, who ruled during one of Rome's darkest times. A devastating plague swept through the empire, armies rebelled, and enemies pressed at the borders. Yet his writings in Meditations are not filled with despair or panic. Instead, he counsels himself to remain just, to remain calm, to face each day with steadiness. Imagine being a soldier under such a leader. Even if the world seemed to collapse, you could look at your emperor and see a man who refused to lose his center. That kind of composure strengthens everyone around it. This is why calm inspires respect. It is a refuge for others. In every family, in every community, in every team, there are moments of fear and confusion. The one who remains calm becomes the anchor others cling to. Their steadiness communicates silently, "We will endure this. We will find a way." People value such presence because it restores courage within themselves. And calm is not weakness. It is not passivity. It is strength under control. The Stoic does not deny the storm, but they refuse to be consumed by it. They do not collapse into despair, nor do they lash out recklessly. They face difficulty with measured action and clear thought. To cultivate this composure is to cultivate value. When others see that you do not lose yourself in anger, that you do not fall apart under pressure, they will turn to you naturally, not because you demanded their respect, but because you earned it through the power of your calm. And in every age, from ancient Rome to the present, those who can remain steady in the storm are always valued above those who cannot. A life lived only for oneself is a life that quickly fades. The Stoics understood that true worth is not measured by how much you consume, but by how much you contribute. To live for service rather than self is to align your life with something greater, something that lasts. Selfishness might bring temporary pleasure, but it never brings respect. People tolerate the selfish, but they revere the selfless. Marcus Aurelius wrote again and again that a man is made for the service of the community, just as the hand is made for the body. He reminded himself that his role as emperor was not to indulge in luxury, but to protect, to guide, and to preserve the welfare of the empire. Epictetus told his students that our duties to one another are written into nature itself. To be human is to be part of a larger whole, and to act against that truth is to diminish oneself. Think of the people you value most in your own life. Chances are they are not the ones who always demanded attention, who always sought their own gain. Instead, they are those who helped you in times of need, who gave their time, their wisdom, or their care without expecting a reward. These are the people we hold in highest regard because they reflect the Stoic principle that service is the path to true value. The Stoic lives for the common good, and this is what makes them indispensable. When they make choices, they ask not only, "What benefits me?" but what benefits the whole? This perspective is rare, and because it is rare, it is treasured. Those who act from selfish desire may win applause for a moment, but those who act from service earn gratitude that lasts a lifetime. If you wish to be truly valued, then serve. Do not seek to take more than you give. Do not measure your worth by possessions, but by the good you leave in others. For as the Stoics knew, a life of service is a life that cannot be erased, because its impact continues long after the individual is gone. There is immense power in silence, not the silence of indifference or fear, but the silence of discipline, of restraint, of a mind that speaks only when words matter. The Stoics prized this kind of silence because they understood that words are weighty things. To throw them carelessly is to cheapen them. To measure them carefully is to make them valuable. Epictetus taught his students that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, so that we might listen more than we speak. The one who listens deeply, who does not rush to interrupt, who absorbs what is said before responding, gains an authority that no amount of noise can achieve. People notice the difference between someone who speaks to fill silence and someone who speaks because they have something worth saying. Silence is not weakness, it is strength under control. The one who remains silent when provoked is not defeated but victorious, for they have denied anger its fuel. The one who resists the urge to boast or to flatter shows that they are not dependent on the approval of others. The one who waits, who observes, who chooses their words with care, creates the impression of depth, and depth is always valued more than surface. Think of the leaders, mentors, or friends who left the strongest impression on you. Were they the ones who talked endlessly, or the ones whose few words carried weight? Wisdom often travels in silence before it speaks. The Stoic understood this, and so they practiced restraint in speech as much as in desire. In a noisy world, silence becomes a mark of distinction. Everyone rushes to speak, to post, to argue, to be heard. Few are willing to hold their tongue, to observe, to wait for the right moment. But those who do stand out. Their silence is not emptiness, it is a reservoir. And when they finally speak, their words strike like lightning, because everyone knows they are not wasted. This is why the strength of silence creates value. It shows mastery of the self, control over impulse, and reverence for truth. People come to value those who speak less, but mean more, who listen deeply and respond with clarity. In every age, it is the quiet but steady voices of wisdom that outlast the noise of the crowd. Hardship has always been the great test of the soul. To the Stoics, endurance was not simply a necessity of life, but a pathway to greatness. Anyone can smile in times of ease, but it is the one who endures suffering with dignity who becomes admired, even revered. When misfortune strikes, most collapse into bitterness, anger, or despair. But the Stoic views pain and struggle as a training ground, a forge in which character is made unbreakable. Epictetus knew this truth intimately. Born a slave, beaten and mocked, he endured suffering that would have broken most men. Yet instead of collapsing, he transformed his pain into wisdom. His teachings on freedom, resilience, and dignity echo across centuries, not because he avoided hardship, but because he mastered it. Marcus Aurelius, too, despite being emperor, faced endless wars, betrayal, and plague. Yet his writings show a man who endured with calmness, reminding himself each day that suffering is part of life's fabric, and that to endure without bitterness is a form of victory. People naturally admire those who suffer without surrender. There is a nobility in endurance because it reflects strength of soul. A person who bears pain with quiet courage becomes an example to everyone who watches. They remind us that we too can carry our burdens. And so, endurance makes a person valuable not only for themselves, but for all who are inspired by their resilience. When you endure without complaint, you become proof of the Stoic belief that circumstances do not define you. Your response does. That is why endurance is admired. It is a visible sign of invisible strength, a demonstration that the spirit can rise above any blow. And those who show such strength are remembered long after comfort seekers are forgotten. Humility is the quiet magnet of respect. Unlike arrogance, which demands attention, humility earns it naturally. The Stoics practiced humility not as weakness, but as the acknowledgement of truth, that we are mortal, that fortune is fleeting, that no one is too great to fall. To remember these things is not to belittle oneself, but to remain grounded in reality. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man of his time, constantly reminded himself that he was just a man destined to return to dust. He wrote of how fame is fleeting, how those who praise us today will themselves be gone tomorrow. This humility did not make him smaller as a leader. It made him greater because it kept him from being corrupted by pride. His people could trust him because he was not blinded by his own ego. Seneca, though wealthy and influential, urged himself and others to live simply, to eat plainly, to practice poverty so that luxury would not rule them. He knew that arrogance, born from riches or power, only breeds resentment and distance. But humility invites closeness. It makes people feel safe, respected, and valued in return. The humble are treasured because they never make others feel small. They do not flaunt, they do not boast, they do not step on others to lift themselves higher. Instead, they meet people as equals, regardless of rank or fortune. This is why humility attracts. It is rare, it is refreshing, and it makes greatness approachable. To live humbly is not to deny your strengths, but to remember that they are gifts, not entitlements. It is to acknowledge that wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance belong to anyone willing to practice them, not only to you. And when people sense this humility, they value you more deeply, for they know you are not pretending, not performing, but living honestly, aware of your place in the order of things. Thus, humility, invisible to the arrogant, becomes the hidden magnet that draws respect. It makes a person not just tolerated, but beloved. And in the end, humility ensures that one's greatness is remembered not with envy or resentment, but with genuine reverence. Justice, to the Stoics, was not an abstract principle reserved for courts and laws. It was the foundation of human worth. Marcus Aurelius wrote that what injures the hive injures the bee, a reminder that our lives are woven together and that fairness toward others is not optional but essential. To act unjustly is to harm not only those around you but also yourself, for you betray your own nature when you abandon fairness. People instinctively value those who are just. We may admire cleverness or be dazzled by wealth, but we trust and respect those who act with integrity. Justice creates safety. It reassures others that you will not take advantage of them, that you will not betray them when given the chance. An unjust person might rise quickly in power, but their influence is fragile. For the moment trust is lost, their foundation collapses. A just person, by contrast, builds something that lasts. Epictetus told his students that we are citizens of the world, part of a greater community bound by reason and nature. This sense of justice extends beyond personal gain. It demands that we consider the common good, that we act not only for ourselves but for others. A person who embodies justice stands as a pillar in their community, someone others can rely on when conflicts arise or decisions must be made. Injustice may bring temporary rewards, but it leaves a bitter taste. Justice, though it may sometimes cost us comfort or advantage, leaves a legacy of trust. And that legacy is what makes people truly valued. They are remembered not for their clever tricks, but for their unwavering fairness, for the way they treated others with dignity even when it was inconvenient. To live justly is to live in such a way that your presence strengthens the fabric of the whole. That is a kind of wealth no fortune can rival. Self-discipline is one of the most visible and powerful forms of inner strength. The Stoics knew that without discipline, virtue collapses. What good is wisdom if you cannot resist your impulses? What use is courage if you are enslaved by desire? To govern oneself is the greatest mark of freedom, and it is this mastery that others notice and admire. In a world where indulgence is celebrated and restraint is mocked, discipline shines like a rare jewel. Seneca warned of luxury's chains, reminding his readers that the one who cannot live without abundance is weaker than the one who is content with little. The disciplined person proves their independence by needing less, by being able to say no when the crowd says yes, by resisting temptations that enslave others. When people encounter someone who is disciplined, they sense strength. A person who wakes with purpose, who controls their tongue, who eats and drinks with moderation, who works with consistency, such a person radiates reliability. They inspire others, often without a word, simply by their example. Discipline commands respect because it is so rare, and because it shows mastery over the most difficult opponent, the self. Think of the leaders who crumble because they could not master their appetites. Wealth, power, reputation, all destroyed by a single weakness unchecked. Then think of those who endure, decade after decade, steady and uncorrupted. The difference is discipline. The Stoics saw it not as denial, but as liberation. To control yourself is to be free from slavery to pleasure, fear, and habit. This is why self-discipline makes a person valuable. It is not merely about rigid control, it is about strength that others can lean on. People trust the disciplined because they know such a person will not be carried away by impulses or temptations. In a world ruled by indulgence, the disciplined become unshakable pillars, and pillars are always valued because they hold up everything around them. Most people are prisoners of reputation. They rise and fall with every word of praise or insult, chained to the shifting winds of opinion. But the Stoics saw through this trap. They knew that to live for approval is to live as a slave, because your worth becomes the possession of others. Epictetus reminded his students that what others say or think lies beyond your control, and therefore should never dictate your peace of mind. The most valued people are those who stand apart from this game. They are not flattered into arrogance by applause, nor are they crushed by criticism. Their sense of self is rooted in virtue, not in vanity. They live by their principles, not by the approval of the crowd. This detachment does not make them cold or indifferent to others. Rather, it makes them incorruptible. Their choices remain steady, guided by reason, not by the fickle emotions of those around them. People respect this quality deeply, even if they do not fully understand it. There is something magnetic about a person who does not bend to praise or blame, who remains the same in triumph or defeat. Such a person becomes trustworthy because you know they will not abandon their principles for applause or betray them to avoid criticism. In a world where so many chase validation, the one who is free from it becomes a beacon. This is why the Stoics taught detachment from reputation. It is not that words have no effect, but that they cannot touch the core of who you are unless you allow them to. To be valued, then, is to be untouchable by flattery and unshaken by insult, to walk through both applause and ridicule with the same steady stride. That kind of strength is unforgettable. Courage, to the Stoics, was not reserved for the battlefield. It was not limited to soldiers facing swords or emperors confronting enemies. Courage was something far greater and more universal, the refusal to live in fear. It was the daily act of facing pain, loss, or even death without surrendering your integrity. Courage meant choosing principle over safety, truth over comfort, virtue over survival. Marcus Aurelius wrote that death is nothing to be feared, for it is part of nature, and what is natural cannot be evil. Epictetus told his students that fear is the real prison, not chains or confinement. Seneca taught that the brave man lives fully, while the coward dies 1,000 deaths before his time. For the Stoics, courage was not about reckless boldness, but about quiet strength in the face of inevitable trials. Think of those you most admire in history or in your own life. Are they not those who stood firm when it mattered most? The friend who told the truth even when it cost them? The leader who faced disaster without abandoning their people? The parent who bore hardship silently so their children could have a better life? Courage is not always loud. Often it is silent endurance, the unbroken will that says, "I will not give in." People value courage because it reminds them of what is possible. Fear governs much of human behavior, shrinking lives, silencing voices, chaining people to mediocrity. When someone breaks those chains, when they face hardship or threat without losing themselves, they awaken something in others. They become a living example of freedom. This is why courage is unforgettable. It does not require a crown, a stage, or an audience. It requires only the refusal to surrender to fear. And those who live with such courage are remembered, respected, and valued long after those who sought only comfort have been forgotten. Simplicity is a treasure so often overlooked in a world obsessed with excess. The Stoics knew that the more you complicate your life with desires, possessions, and pretenses, the further you drift from peace. Simplicity, however, strips away the unnecessary and reveals what truly matters. A simple life is not an impoverished life. It is a clear life, a life uncluttered by distractions that weaken the soul. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself of the fleeting nature of luxury. The finest foods, he wrote, are nothing more than the flesh of animals and a little wine. The most exquisite garments are merely wool dyed with purple. By reducing things to their essence, he freed himself from illusion. Seneca, though wealthy, practiced meals of coarse bread and plain water so that he would never be enslaved by indulgence. Epictetus, with little more than a cloak and a lamp, lived with a freedom that no emperor could surpass. People value simplicity because it brings authenticity. The one who lives simply does not need to impress. Their presence itself is a relief in a world of noise and show. They are direct, honest, and free from the burdens of pretense. Their words carry weight because they are not dressed in unnecessary complexity. Their lives inspire because they show that happiness is not found in constant acquisition, but in clarity, restraint, and balance. Simplicity endures when everything else fades. What is extravagant soon becomes outdated, but the simple remains timeless. That is why those who embrace simplicity often leave the deepest marks on history. They are remembered not for the clutter they collected, but for the clarity they embodied. To be valued, then, is not to be dazzling, but to be simple, so that what you are and what you stand for shines without distraction. In simplicity lies purity, and in purity lies strength. The Stoics were not content with lofty ideas left unpracticed. They knew that value is built not in grand speeches, but in daily habits. Small, steady practices shape the soul, carving character over years until it becomes unshakable. This is why they treated philosophy not as theory, but as a way of life, a discipline lived each day. Morning reflections were central to their practice. Marcus Aurelius began his day by reminding himself of the challenges ahead, that he would meet selfish, angry, and dishonest people, and that none of this should disturb his peace. By preparing his mind, he disarmed disappointment before it arrived. In the evening, they practiced review. Seneca wrote of examining his conscience at night, asking what he had done well, what he had done poorly, and how he might improve tomorrow. This habit of daily self-examination created accountability within the soul itself. Journaling, meditation on mortality, and mental rehearsal of hardship were also common practices. The Stoic would imagine the loss of wealth, health, or even life, not to dwell in despair, but to free themselves from fear. By confronting hardship in thought, they prepared to face it with calmness in reality. Discipline of the body also played its role. Moderate food, rest, and exercise ensured that the body did not weaken the resolve of the mind. What makes these practices so valuable is not their complexity, but their consistency. Day after day, year after year, the Stoics strengthened themselves through repetition, just as an athlete strengthens through training. People admire this because it shows seriousness. It proves that philosophy is not mere words, but a lived truth. Even today, these practices retain their power. A quiet morning of reflection, an honest evening review, a written journal of lessons, the discipline to accept small discomforts, these build a foundation of strength. And strength is always valued. When people see someone who is calm in crisis, fair in conflict, disciplined in habit, they may not know the source, but they sense the difference. That difference is born from daily practice. To live as a Stoic is to build value one day at a time, until your life itself becomes a lesson to all who encounter it. The Stoics lived with an eye on the long horizon. They measured life not in fleeting moments of pleasure, but in decades of steady growth, in the legacy that endures after death. To think long-term is to free yourself from the tyranny of immediate gratification. It is to step out of the frenzy of the crowd, which constantly chases what sparkles now, and to plant seeds that will bear fruit long after the present has passed. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the present is a small moment in the river of time, and that his duty was to act justly within it, not to grasp at temporary gains. Epictetus told his students to consider not the sweetness of a moment's indulgence, but the bitterness it leaves behind and the cost it exacts from the soul. Seneca warned against wasting time as if we had an endless supply, urging instead that we live each day with purpose, knowing that our span is short, but that our influence can be wide. People value long-term thinkers because they are rare. Most live as if today is everything, burning themselves out for applause that will vanish tomorrow. But those who see further, who plan their lives on principles instead of impulses, inspire trust. You can depend on them because they are not tossed about by every trend or temptation. They are builders, not consumers. They are investors in virtue, not spenders of vanity. Long-term vision is what makes someone truly valuable. For when the years pass and the noise of temporary pursuits fades, it is the steady, the patient, the principled who remain standing. The Stoics knew this well, and they lived not for today's applause, but for tomorrow's truth. Here lies one of the most paradoxical truths of Stoicism. Those who chase value never truly gain it, while those who forget it and focus on virtue are valued most of all. The person who constantly asks, "Do they respect me? Do they notice me? Do they admire me?" reveals their hunger, and hunger never earns reverence. But the one who does not seek to be noticed, who quietly lives with integrity and purpose, is the one whom others cannot help but notice. Epictetus warned against living as if the opinions of others were the measure of life. He reminded his students that applause is as fleeting as the breath that carries it. Marcus Aurelius urged himself not to waste time worrying about reputation, for those who praise you today will themselves be dust tomorrow. Seneca, too, taught that greatness comes not from pursuing recognition, but from mastering the self. And yet, here is the paradox. When you cease to chase recognition and instead live by principle, recognition follows. People are drawn to those who are indifferent to fame, who serve without demand, who act justly without seeking reward. Their indifference to being valued becomes the very thing that makes them valued. This is the Stoic way, to be content with virtue alone, to measure your worth by what you can control, your thoughts, your actions, your character. If praise comes, accept it humbly. If criticism comes, endure it calmly. But in both cases, remain the same, steady and true. The paradox of value is that the more you seek it, the less you have it. But when you live as if you need nothing from others, when you act from principle alone, you become rare. And rarity is what the world treasures most. Thus, by not seeking to be valued, you become unforgettable. To become a person of value in today's world is to walk against the current. The age we live in celebrates noise, speed, and appearances, but true worth lies in the opposite direction, in silence, patience, and substance. This is why those who embody Stoic wisdom stand out so powerfully. They are rare, and rarity is what makes them indispensable. In the workplace, the Stoic is not the loudest voice in the room, but the one people trust when decisions must be made. They do not panic in crisis, nor do they flatter superiors to climb higher. Their calmness, fairness, and discipline make them pillars others lean on. In relationships, the Stoic does not demand constant attention or validation. Instead, they bring steadiness and integrity, making them deeply respected and cherished. In leadership, the Stoic leads not through fear or manipulation, but through example, showing that strength can be quiet and that true authority comes from service. How then can you begin to live as one of these rare people? Start small, with the daily practices that shape character. Each morning, remind yourself that the day ahead will bring challenges, but that your response belongs to you. Each evening, reflect honestly on how you acted and where you can improve. Discipline your desires, not to deny joy, but to ensure that pleasure never rules you. Speak less, but with more weight. Act justly, even when no one is watching. Serve others without seeking recognition. These choices, repeated daily, transform you into someone others naturally value. They may not always say it, but they will feel it. They will sense the rare presence of someone who is not enslaved by the world, but who stands firm within it. And in a time when so many chase attention, the one who does not need it becomes priceless. In the end, the question of value is a question of legacy. What will remain of you when the noise of your life fades? Fortune will vanish. Fame will vanish. Even the most powerful titles will dissolve into dust. But character endures. Wisdom endures. The example of a life lived with courage, justice, temperance, and humility continues to echo long after the body is gone. Marcus Aurelius is remembered not for the armies he commanded, but for the words he left in his meditations. Epictetus is remembered not for the hardships he suffered, but for the freedom he discovered within himself. Seneca is remembered not for his role in politics, but for his letters on how to live and how to die. Their legacies prove that true value lies not in possessions or applause, but in the soul's strength. One day, you too will leave this world. The question is not whether you will be remembered, for most names fade. The question is whether your life will have carried weight in the lives of those around you. Will your presence have brought calm in storms, fairness in conflict, service in need? Will your example inspire those who come after you? The Stoics would tell you this: live each day as if it were your last, but live it with virtue, so that when you are gone, what remains is not your wealth, not your image, but the strength of your character. That is the only legacy that truly lasts. And it is why the most valued people in every age follow Stoic wisdom, not to be remembered, but to live rightly. And by living rightly, they are remembered forever.